Here we are for this unit, starting off with Manifest Destiny and giving you an idea of the background of Manifest Destiny and what all is leading up to the middle of the 1840s. So we're talking about the expansion of the United States. Okay, so let's start off with just a real quick question for you. What is Manifest Destiny? You've probably heard this term. You probably know this term already. Manifest Destiny is simply the belief that the United States should expand from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. We should go across the North American continent. As some people put it, we should go from sea to shining sea. That term actually came from a guy named John O'Sullivan. He was writing in a newspaper in 1839, and he said that the United States needed to fulfill its manifest destiny. This idea that God wanted us to expand. Not only did God want us to expand, but that this was an unstoppable force. Okay? The destiny part of it. This is going to happen. We are fated to expand across the continent. Okay? And with that, okay, Manifest Destiny isn't just about expansion. Okay? There's all this other stuff that goes on into it. Okay? If you look in the background, you see this painting. And you can kind of look how at what all is going on in this painting, but this is a representation of what we're doing here with Manifest Destiny. Okay, if you look here, we have the pioneers heading out. Guys that are going to go farm and ranch. They're heading out to kind of tame the land. But who's coming behind them? Okay, we have our wagons, our wagon trains, the stagecoaches, the railroads are coming with us. Okay, you see industrialization there in the background. And here, this isn't Lady Liberty. This is going to be Columbia. Columbia is kind of the feminine representation of the spirit of America. She's headed west. There's a couple things that she's got with her. This right here, you probably can't make it out, but this is a Holy Bible. So we're also going to spread Christianity into these areas. And then here, in her arm, wrapped around her arm, and what she's dragging behind her, what she's laying out behind her, do you know what that is? It's not telephone line, if that's what you thought. It's actually telegraph line. Telegraph had been invented in the mid-1800s, so that's what that is. Now, there is one interesting thing to note about this particular painting. If you kind of look at the way it's set up, it's kind of set up in that old Hudson River Valley School style. Okay? The light of civilization. Here comes man bringing civilization with him. And this side is a little bit darker, a little bit less civilized, we might say. What are we chasing off? We're chasing off the buffalo, but look at who else we're chasing off over here. Chasing off the Native Americans. They're looking up at this progress. They're fleeing the progress. So some interesting things going on in this painting. Okay. Well, let's start off with a review of our territorial expansion. If you remember, at the end of the American Revolution, the United States had all the territory up to the Mississippi River. We actually did not have Florida. This is a little bit different map. Okay. We had all the territory up to the Mississippi River. Well, that changed in 1803 when we then got to the Louisiana Purchase and added the middle half of the United States. So this was the United States. Okay. And it remained that way for a while, for several decades. 1810, we acquired West Florida. 1819, the Adams-on-Yeast Treaty. We got East Florida. And so that is where we are. That's where we're sitting now as we approach the mid-1800s. Okay. Now, why is it people wanted to expand? I mean, if you kind of think back at those last couple things, I mean, expansion was haphazard. It was random. I mean, we wanted to buy New Orleans. We didn't want to buy all of Louisiana. You just couldn't pass up that deal. But by the time you get to the 1830s, people are saying, we need to expand, we want to expand, this needs to be something organized that we're doing. So why? Well, part of it had to do with that wave of patriotism that spread across the United States after the War of 1812, that era of good feelings. And there was a sense that the United States was going to bring civilization. We needed to tame this land out west. there were already people out there. There were fur traders that were going out to different places. Missionaries were headed out to try to find Native Americans and convert them. There were scientists and explorers going out there seeing what they could find and discover. And as their notes came back, whether they were in letters or diaries or formal papers that were written, they all talked about the potential that existed out west. Okay? The potential for resources, the potential for economics. Lewis and Clark in 1803 had already proved that a route across the United States all the way to the Pacific was possible. Okay? Just by walking across, they were able to prove that that was possible. And so, saying, well, why should we be involved in present-day Washington State? Well, it's so far away from where everything else was. Lewis and Clark proved it really wasn't. All we needed was the transportation network to be able to get there. They also, by way of their exploration, they were one of the groups that helped give us claim to the Oregon Territory. That's going to be the focus, as Oregon and Washington are seen as very fertile areas. There was also a view that expansion and movement west would provide a social safety valve. What that means is we have the opportunity for people who have in some way failed in their life. They can move west and they can start over. One of the great phrases that's been used throughout U.S. history, advice for young people is, go west, young man. That is where you can make your fortune. That's where the future is. Okay? If you have lost everything here in the East, you can go to the West and no one will know. Not only will no one know, but you'll have the same opportunities. Everybody out there has a chance to start over, a chance to make things new. And so it was kind of seen as, this is a good thing. Now, there are some problems inherent with expansion. One of them should be kind of obvious. All this stuff originally belonged to someone else, and so other countries are kind of in the way. The ones we'll talk about here are France. They owned Louisiana. We got them out of the way, though. Spain had Florida. They also have Texas, New Mexico, and California. We'll talk about this a little bit more in just a few minutes. One of the other problems is Britain. Okay, Britain's up there. They control Canada, and we have issues with British Canada. Some border issues that had to be solved. And so part of the steps to solving that, in 1818, there's a treaty that's signed. We call it the Convention of 1818. Sorry for the long definition here, but I really didn't see any other way to get you that information. The Convention of 1818 started to set the 49th parallel, 49 degrees north latitude, as the boundary between Canada and the United States. Okay. So if you look at a modern map of the United States, that flat border we have with Canada out in the west, that is started, the creation of that starts in 1818 and actually ran basically from the Great Lakes to the Rocky Mountains. And it kind of stopped there in the Rocky Mountains. Okay. Another treaty in 1842, there's the Webster-Ashburton Treaty that clarified the main boundary. But the big issue we have going on, these are minor details. Where does our boundary begin and yours end? The big issue is Oregon. And the United States and Britain decided to jointly occupy Oregon. Okay? See, here's 49 degrees. This is where the Convention of 1818 established the U.S.-Canadian border, but it stopped here. Now, this is called the Continental Divide. This is basically where the Rocky Mountain peaks are. Okay, right through here. And so the 49th parallel border stopped here. And when it came to Oregon, we consider all of this here to be what we call the Oregon Territory. Okay? And so all this stuff up here is stuff that the United States says, look, this belongs to us. This is part of Oregon. We've had some citizens go up in here and explore, so this is ours. Britain claimed all the way down here. This, by the way, is going to be the northern border of California. It's the 42nd parallel. Britain claims all this down here and says, no, 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 we have British citizens and British subjects here. The British have explored some of these rivers, and so this is ours. So the big question is, okay, who should have this territory? And early in the 1800s, after the War of 1812, the two countries agree we're going to jointly occupy it. That means the British are able to have forts and send their citizens in, and we are also. And this is seen as kind of the best solution, especially since after the War of 1812, we're on much better terms with Britain. Now, other problems with expansion involve the United States and what's going on within us. Some people see this expansion and they see a problem with it. To be perfectly honest, no one really saw a problem with the addition of the new territory. It was what was going to move into that territory. Originally, one of the problems involved the states in the East, the original 13 states. They saw people moving west as a political problem. Every person who moves out of an eastern state into a western state takes their political power with them. And so the eastern states kind of saw the western states starting to take political power. Right? As the western states grew politically, as they grew in population and then grew in political clout, the nation started to address the issues of the West, like internal improvements, building roads and canals out west, looking at how should Western farmers be treated. And so that was a problem for the East, but that's not the main issue. The main issue in most people, especially in the North's mind, is the spread of slavery. Because every time you add territory out west, you have to look at, okay, is this territory going to increase slavery or not? In 1820, Congress had created the Missouri Compromise. If you remember, the Missouri Compromise allowed Missouri in as a slave state, but then also created the state of Maine as a free state. So here we have Missouri, we have Maine. This is sectional balance. 11 slave states, 11 free states, preserving balance in the Senate. And then it drew this line here. 36 to 30. 36 degrees, 30 minutes north latitude. The present northern border of Arkansas and Oklahoma. And what the compromise said was, above this line, in the Louisiana Territory, slavery would be prohibited. Below the line, slavery would be allowed. And that's really the thing you need to know. Okay? As far as expansion, the key words are going to be below the line, slavery is fine. Because when you start going west, there's already a plan in place to extend this line going this direction. So every piece of territory we gain from here on out, that line is going to be an important factor. If we gain territory up here, well, that'll be close to slavery. But if we gain territory down here, that territory will be open to slavery. And abolitionists will not support that. We cannot talk about manifest destiny without talking about Texas, and we cannot be in Mr. Strunk's class without talking about Texas. As most of you know, Texas was actually Spanish territory until 1821, at which point it became Mexican territory. Now, whether you're talking about Spanish Texas or Mexican Texas in the 1700s, early 1800s, both countries have the same problem. Nobody wants to live in Texas. In 1800, I think the population of Texas was somewhere around 4,000. And you really don't have many centers of population. The biggest center of population is going to be San Antonio. Second biggest center of population in Texas is going to be Nacogdoches, which is in East Texas. And so Spain, in the early 1800s, while they still had Texas, they came up with something called the impresario system. Okay? What they would do, you would have an agent. a land agent, and his job was going to be to bring settlers to Texas. They would cut out a section of Texas, and this agent would agree to bring in so many family units to start to populate Texas. Now, part of the agreements that everybody would sign off on is the settlers are going to do a couple things. They're going to convert to Catholicism, because that is, of course, Spain's religion. They're going to adopt Spanish, and they will use Spanish as the official language, and they will learn Spanish. And they will also agree to become citizens of Spain, and once it becomes Mexican territory, they will agree to become citizens of Mexico. Okay? These are required of the settlers who are going to move in. Now, some of the big events in Texas history leading up to where our focus. Moses Austin became the first American impresario. He got his contract from the Spanish government. He was going to bring in 300 families into Texas from the United States. He thought this was a good plan. He was kind of a land speculator already, and so this was just kind of natural for him. Unfortunately for him, shortly after he gets his grant, he dies. It'll be up to his son, Stephen F. Austin, to bring the first American settlers into Texas, honoring his father's land grant. Now, he did have to go, he originally headed toward Spain, toward San Antonio, to talk to Spanish officials about inheriting the claim. While he was there, the Mexican Revolution happened, and he ended up having to go to Mexico City to try to get his inheritance to this claim recognized, and they did. And so he brought the first families in. Now, there were other impresarios besides Stephen F. Austin, and in November of 1826, one of them, a man named Hayden Edwards, is going to lead something called the Fredonian Rebellion. The Fredonian Rebellion was centered around Nacogdoches, Texas, in East Texas. It didn't last very long, failed pretty quickly. No one really supported it, but it did cause the Mexican government to authorize something called the Mir y Terán expedition. An expedition that's going to move through Texas and just kind of survey the land and take note of what is going on in Texas. And what they found is that Texas was becoming overly populated with Americans. Now, as a result, Terán, in his report back to the Mexican government, is going to warn about what the United States has planned for Texas. And he's going to advise the Mexican government to do things to rein in the number of Americans that are starting to cross the border into Texas, saying this is going to get out of control. By the time Terán issues his report, I think the ratio of Anglos to Mexicans in Texas was something like 7-1. Now, because of the Terán expedition, Mexico is going to implement something called the Law of April 6, 1830, which has been described as, to the Texas Revolution, what the Stamp Act was to the American Revolution. I don't know that it's exactly true, but it is one of the things that would plant kind of the seeds of rebellion in a lot of people's minds. Because one of the things that it did was it banned immigration to Texas from the United States. So a lot of these impresarios who had invested in getting land grants and were planning on bringing families to Texas saw their economic chances going up in smoke. It also banned the further importation of slaves. Mexico had banned slavery when it became independent, but originally in Texas they had kind of been willing to turn a blind eye to the American settlers, but no more. They're going to ban the further importation of slaves with an eye toward looking at abolishing slavery in Texas. In 1834, a man named Santa Anna, he had been elected president of Mexico. He was a hero in Mexico because he had helped defend against a Spanish invasion, but he became a dictator. He decided that Mexico was not ready for democracy and installed himself as dictator, and that, among some other things, is going to be one of the things that prompts Texas to rebel and the Texas Revolution of 1836. Okay? Some of the key battles you should probably be familiar with in the Texas Revolution. Of course, the Battle of the Alamo, which is immortalized in our history. Also the Battle of Goliad. Both of these battles, of course, were lost by the Texans. Santa Anna showed no mercy to any survivors that were there. The Battle of Goliad, he actually took a lot of prisoners. There wasn't really a battle. There were just Texas revolutionaries who surrendered, and he had them all executed. But the last battle, in April of 1836, of course, the Battle of San Jacinto, where Santa Anna was defeated. He was captured and forced to sign a document recognizing the independence of Texas. Even though Texas takes great pride in the fact that we were an independent country, you should know that after Texas became independent, we immediately asked to be annexed to the United States. There was no waiting period. We wanted to be part of the United States, but it was the United States that put Texas off and didn't want to annex Texas because of the divisiveness of slavery. Andrew Jackson was president, and he was in his last year in office, and he didn't want that. He didn't want that to be an issue in the coming election. But as long as Texas is there, it continued to be a political problem. As you had one party saying, you had groups within one party saying, we want this territory to be added to the United States. All this Manifest Destiny stuff is going to come to a head in the election of 1844. Sometimes it's called the Manifest Destiny election. And originally, in 1844, the two front runners, the Whigs, they saw Henry Clay as their potential nominee. In fact, he would be their nominee. For the Democrats, the front runner, the guy that we all think is going to be the Democratic nominee, is Martin Van Buren. Okay? Andrew Jackson's former vice president, former president who had been defeated in 1840. He is planning on making a comeback. And running for president again, and he thinks this time he will win again. Okay? Now the two of them, Henry Clay and Martin Van Buren, they had factions within their own parties. The Whigs and the Democrats both had factions that were strongly in favor of the annexation of Texas, and they had factions that were strongly opposed to the annexation of Texas. So this is a political nightmare for you. How do I deal with an issue that 1/3 of the people don't care about, 1/3 of the people hate, and 1/3 of the people demand I deal with it? The answer that both of them came up with is not to talk about it. Clay and Van Buren exchanged letters saying, look, on the issue of, since we're going to be the front runners, since we're going to be the nominees, on the issue of Texas, let's just not talk about it. We'll talk about everything else, but let's not talk about Texas. It's a problem. Now, unfortunately for the election, the Democrats didn't like Van Buren. Okay? The Democratic Party had a couple of years before installed a rule that required 2/3 of all the delegates of the convention to agree on the nominee for president. Van Buren doesn't have 2/3 of the votes. Okay? What he needs 2/3 of the delegates, 2/3 of the people that are there at the Democratic convention to support him, and he doesn't have it. Best he could ever get was about half. Okay? The problem for the other Democrats is they don't have 2/3 either. Okay? Basically, the way this worked is you had a giant meeting hall, hundreds of delegates from all over the country meeting to discuss, okay, who will be our candidate for president? Men give up and give speeches. I'm the one, I'm your guy, vote for me. And then the delegates on a piece of paper write down the person they want to be the party's nominee. They pass those papers up, they're counted, and we see who has the 2/3 majority. No one could come up with that. Okay? We take a break, you try to convince the person next to you to vote for your guy, we vote again, more speeches are made, we vote again, and so on, and they vote over and over and over again, and no one can come up with 2/3. Then along came this guy, James K. Polk. James K. Polk is not running for president. He was the governor of Tennessee. He's not running for president, but he is there at the Democratic convention because he's a Democrat. And one of his political supporters says, well, wait a minute, what about James K. Polk? Okay. He's referred to as a dark horse. He's somebody who we don't expect to all of a sudden be running for president. All of a sudden, here he is. His name is in nomination. And what happens is he is a compromise candidate. All these people who don't like Van Buren and all these people that don't like the other candidates, they're brought the name James K. Polk, and somebody says, look, if you vote for James K. Polk, at least the guys you don't like aren't going to be the nominee. And so the Democrats unite behind Polk, and in his campaign, he hasn't made any promises to Henry Clay. He's going to make Texas and also Oregon the issues in the campaign. Okay? One of his campaign slogans involved Oregon, 54-40 or fight. Okay? 54-40, that's the northern boundary of our claim in Oregon. James K. Polk said, look, we're going to get all of this, or we're going to go to war. Okay? Because Polk is going to bring Texas into it, Clay has to now clarify his position on Texas. The letters to Van Buren are released to the public. And Clay has to come in and clarify, well, when it comes to Texas, annexation of Texas would be great, but we have to make sure that, we don't anger Mexico, and whether or not slavery is in Texas, we shouldn't care about. And what happens is that forcing Clay to clarify his position actually causes Clay to lose some supporters. How important is it to keep your supporters together? This election is extremely close. Okay? Only somewhere around 40,000 votes nationwide separate Polk and Clay. So Polk wins by about 40,000 popular votes. Okay? Popular vote doesn't matter though, right? It comes down to the state of New York. Polk wins New York by just over 5,000 votes. This gives him all of New York's electoral votes. This means he will be the new president. So he wins New York by 5,000 votes. In the North, there is another party. They're called the Liberty Party. They're a third party. We usually don't talk about third parties. That's why I didn't have them here. The Liberty Party, which supported abolition, in New York State, got 15,000 votes. Had those 15,000 votes instead gone to Henry Clay, Henry Clay would have won New York. He would have been elected president in 1844. But those 15,000 people are hardcore abolitionists who refused to support Henry Clay. He didn't even need all 15,000 of them. He needed 6,000 of them. So he didn't even need a majority. Okay? That's where those third parties and those close elections matter. Now, Polk is going to become president, and one of his issues was Oregon, and he wanted all of Oregon. And so in 1846, he's going to sign a treaty with Britain. We're going to sign a treaty with Britain. He didn't get all of Oregon. Instead, what happened is we got basically half. Okay? The British had claimed all the way down here to California. We claimed all the way up here. This, by the way, is Alaska right up in here, if you can see that. We already have this nice little 49-degree line running right across the territory, so the decision is made just to extend the line. Okay? The U.S. representative at the treaty, he knows. He knows James K. Polk is going to have to negotiate on this. And so when the idea is floated, why don't we just extend that 49-degree line? The United States agrees. This makes the most sense. It is easier. It does give the island of Vancouver over to the British in Canada. But that's fine. That was seen as acceptable. And the thing that's going to happen now, the thing that's important is, now Polk is going to start looking south. Okay, where's the next piece of territory to add? And that's something we'll talk about later. All right, I hope that helps you understand Manifest Destiny and you're able to kind of know the roots of it.